30 Years of Betrayal. The Secret Ledger. Under my model, Husband's Deathbed. Welcome to Revenge Blaze, the channel dedicated to real-life family drama, betrayal stories, quiet revenge through strength, and hard-earned life lessons. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you're new here, stick around. We have powerful stories coming up that might just change how you look at trust and money in relationships. Don't leave yet. The next one is always worth it. And now, without further delay, here is today's story. Oh my God, for 30 years my old dog of a husband went to the bank every Monday at exactly 2 p.m. Rain or shine, sick or healthy, he never missed a single one. When I asked why he'd kiss my forehead and say the same thing every single time, just keeping our future secure, Gene, I believed him. Why wouldn't I? Dennis was the model husband and insurance agent who lived and breathed numbers, organization, precision. Bills paid on time, taxes filed, early retirement accounts he assured me were rock solid. For 3 decades in our peaceful Louisville home, I handed over the finances without a second thought. He handled the money, I handled the home. It was our arrangement, and it worked perfectly. Or so I thought. Until that Monday when the whole facade cracked wide open. He suffered a massive stroke right at his office downtown. His secretary called me, voice trembling. "Mrs. Hill, get to the hospital now, Dennis collapsed." I raced to University of Louisville Hospital, heart pounding. By the time I got there, he was in the ICU machines, breathing for him, eyes half open, but not really seeing. The doctors were blunt, severe, critical, he might not last the night. I stayed glued to his deathbed, holding his cold hand, while the monitors beeped relentlessly. Jerry and Rita arrived soon after, our son looking stunned, our daughter already in tears. We sat there in that sterile room, exchanging hushed memories of the perfect father and husband who'd always been so dependable. But as nurses came and went, I reached for the small pile of his personal items they'd brought from the office briefcase jacket, the little notebook he always carried. That's when I found it. Hidden under the thin hospital blanket near his pillow, tucked away like a final secret he couldn't bear to leave behind, a thick ledger. Black cover, worn edges, pages crammed with his meticulous handwriting. Rows of numbers, dates, unfamiliar accounts. Debts piling up. Loans against our house. Investments that had vanished. My name, my signature on documents I'd never seen, never touched. My blood ran cold. This wasn't some innocent record. This was evidence of betrayal on a scale I couldn't comprehend. 30 years of trust, 30 years of, "I've got it covered," reduced to ink on paper. As I turned the pages faster, the room tilted. Our home, our savings, our entire future gone. And he had known. He had known every single time he kissed my forehead and lied. My life is officially over. If you're over 55 and you've ever felt that quiet unease about the finances in your marriage, the "don't worry, honey" lines, the separate trips to the bank, the man who seems too perfect, stick around. What I uncovered in that ledger destroyed everything I believed about the last 30 years. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications right now. This story gets much darker, and trust me, you need to hear what happened next before you face the same nightmare. The morning after he slipped into a deeper coma, the hospital room felt smaller than ever. Jerry arrived first, still in his work shirt from the night shift, eyes bloodshot but steady. He pulled up a chair next to mine without a word, just squeezed my shoulder. Rita showed up an hour later, makeup already smudged from crying in the car. She went straight to Dennis's side, whispering things like, "Come on, Dad, you promised you'd see my promotion party," the same way she'd talked to him since she was 10. We 3 sat there like statues, watching the ventilator rise and fall, listening to the doctors murmur about no improvement, and prepare for the worst. Dennis held on for 3 more days, long enough for the kids to take turns at his bedside, long enough for me to stare at that notebook I'd hidden in my purse like it was radioactive. I didn't open it again in the hospital. Too many nurses, too many eyes. But the weight of it burned a hole in my bag every time someone asked if I was okay. I kept saying, "I'm fine," which was the biggest lie I'd told since our wedding vows. He passed quietly on a Thursday afternoon. No dramatic last words, no Hollywood moment. Just the monitors flatlining a nurse rushing in and then silence. Jerry handled the paperwork while Rita collapsed against me, sobbing into my shoulder like she was 5 years old again. I held her, but my mind was already somewhere else, on those pages waiting for me at home. The funeral was small, the way Dennis always said he wanted it. A church in our Louisville suburb, a handful of his insurance colleagues, a few neighbors who'd known us for decades. The pastor talked about Dennis being a pillar of the community, a devoted family man. I sat in the front pew nodding along, but inside, I felt like I was watching a play about someone else's life. Jerry gave a short eulogy, something about how his dad taught him to balance a checkbook before he could ride a bike. Rita read a poem she'd written in high school, the one Dennis kept framed in his office. Everyone cried. I didn't. Not because I wasn't grieving. I was. But because the grief hadn't caught up to the anger yet. After the burial, we went back to the house. Jerry offered to stay the night, but I sent him home to his wife. Rita lingered longest, hugging me at the door and saying, "Mom, we'll get through this together, okay?" I nodded, but I already knew the notebook was going to change everything. That night alone in the living room with a cup of tea I didn't drink, I finally spread the pages across the coffee table. Dennis's handwriting. Neat, precise, the same script that used to label our spice jars, now listed horrors. The first few pages were investment logs, stocks, bonds, some sure thing real estate deals he'd chased over the last 6 years. Losses stacked up like bad debts. One entry after another. Tech fund, down $120,000. Crypto venture, wiped out $85,000. Private placement, total loss $145,000. I kept turning pages, my hands shaking harder with each line. Then came the home equity loans, 3 separate ones drawn against our house over 4 years. The total $250,000. Our house. The one we'd bought right after Jerry was born, the one where Rita learned to walk, where we hosted every Thanksgiving and watched the kids graduate. Leveraged to the hilt. Payments funneled into accounts I never knew existed. The interest alone was eating us alive. At the bottom of one page in smaller script like an afterthought he'd written, tried to recover with one last investment. Failed again. Gene can't know yet. Need more time. Time he never got. I sat there until dawn staring at the numbers. The man who'd kissed me goodnight every evening, who'd bragged about being the boring one who keeps things steady, had been bleeding our future dry while I planned garden parties and grandkids' visits. And the worst part, I'd let him. I'd trusted him completely, like some old-fashioned wife from the 1950s who never checks the mail. By morning, the tea was cold and my jaw was set. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a deliberate, years-long deception. And now I had to figure out what came next. Before the bank came knocking. Back home in our peaceful Louisville suburb, alone with the notebook. The house was too silent after the funeral visitors left. No more casseroles on the porch. No more "call if you need anything" from neighbors. Just me, the coffee table, and that black notebook staring back like it knew exactly what it had done. I flipped past the pages I'd already seen, the home equity nightmare, and dove deeper. Dennis had organized everything like one of his insurance policy's tabs dates neat columns. The man who alphabetized his sock drawer had turned our finances into a crime scene. First came the retirement accounts. Our nest egg, the one he'd bragged about building since the kids were in diapers. Page after page showed transfers out, 50,000 here, 75,000 there, funneled into high-yield opportunities he never mentioned at dinner. The losses mounted fast. A biotech startup that tanked in 2019, $120,000 gone. A real estate flip in Nashville that never closed, $85,000 evaporated. Then the big one, a guaranteed index fund tied to tech stocks that crashed in 2022. The final tally, handwritten at the bottom, $350,000 wiped out from what should have been our secure retirement. I stared at the number until it blurred. That was supposed to be cruises in Alaska, helping Jerry's kids with college, maybe a little cabin by the lake. Instead, it was vapor. I turned the page expecting more of the same, but the next section hit like a slap. Credit cards. Not the joint one we used for groceries and gas. These were new accounts opened in my name only. 15 of them applications dated over 5 years, signatures that looked exactly like mine, but weren't. Maximum limits, maxed out jewelry purchases, online gambling sites. I'd never visited, cash advances wired to accounts with numbers that matched nothing in our joint files. The running total, $90,000. My social security number. My maiden name, from before we married, all forged with a precision that made my stomach turn. Dennis had even scanned old documents, our marriage certificate, my driver's license renewals, to make the applications look legitimate. At the end of that section, a single sticky note stuck to the inside cover. His handwriting, smaller than usual, like he was ashamed even in private. Tried to fix it with one more roll of the dice. Dug deeper instead. Jean would never forgive me if she knew. Still hoping to turn it around before it's too late. Too late. The words echoed in the empty room. 30 years of him saying, "I've got this, Jean," while he quietly dismantled everything behind my back. I remembered the late nights he'd come home from client meetings, smelling faintly of coffee and stress, kissing my cheek and saying, "Just another long day, keeping us safe." Safe. The irony burned worse than the numbers. I paced the kitchen notebook, clutched like evidence in a trial. How many times had I smiled and said, "Thank you for handling the boring stuff"? How many times had I ignored that tiny voice asking why he never showed me statements anymore? I'd chalked it up to trust. The kind of trust you build over decades, the kind that lets you sleep easy knowing your partner has your back. Turns out he had my back. Right up until he stuck a knife in it. The anger came in waves. First hot, then cold, then hot again. I thought about calling Jerry right then, waking him up at 2 a.m. to say, "Your father wasn't the hero you eulogized." But I stopped myself. He deserved to hear it in daylight, not over a frantic phone call. Rita. God, Rita. She'd already lost her dad. Telling her he'd also stolen her mother's future would break something that might never mend. I sat back down, forcing myself to keep reading. More notes. Transferred $40,000 from IRA to cover margin call. Can't let Jean see the statement. Renewed credit line in her name. Low risk, high reward. Low risk. The man who lectured Jerry about compound interest had bet our life savings like it was poker night at the Elks Club. By the time the sun came up, I'd read every page twice. The betrayal wasn't just the money. It was the years of careful lies, the kisses that covered guilt, the "I love yous" that sat on top of fraud. I felt like I'd been married to a stranger who wore Dennis's face. And the worst part? Part of me still loved the man I'd thought he was. That made the anger sharper, like salt in an open wound. I closed the notebook, hands steady now. This wasn't over. The numbers were bad, but the truth was worse. And tomorrow I was going to start digging for real. When Jerry came over that evening, he brought coffee and a folder of his own, bank statements he'd pulled from Dennis's office computer before anyone else could. He looked exhausted, tie loosened sleeves, rolled up like he was ready for battle. We sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where Dennis used to balance the checkbook every Sunday night and spread everything out. Jerry went straight to work, flipping through pages with the focus of a man who'd learned accounting from the best. Or so he'd thought. "Mom, look at this," he said quietly, pointing to 3 separate checking accounts in Dennis's name alone. One had been active for 8 years, Another opened 5 years ago, the third just 2. None of them showed up on our joint statements. The balances were pathetic now, a few $100s each, but the transaction history told the story. Transfers out to investment firms, wires to unknown accounts, cash withdrawals labeled client expenses that didn't match any insurance policy I knew. Jerry traced one trail. $40,000 moved from the oldest account to a brokerage in 2020, then nothing came back. These weren't mistakes, he muttered. Dad was siphoning money into side projects. He kept them separate so we, wouldn't see. I stared at the numbers, feeling the room shrink. Dennis had always said separate accounts were for business efficiency. I'd nodded, thinking it made sense for an insurance agent dealing with commissions. Now it looked like efficiency at hiding from his own wife. The phone rang before we could dig further. Rita's name on the screen. I answered on speaker so Jerry could hear. Mom. Her voice was sharp, already defensive. Jerry just texted me about some accounts. What is this? You're going through Dad's stuff already. I took a breath. Rita, we found things. Accounts he never told us about. Money missing. There was a pause, then a rush of words. Missing. Or maybe he was saving for a surprise. Dad would never do anything shady. You know how careful he was. He balanced every penny. Jerry leaned in. Sis, these aren't savings. They're empty shells. He moved money out and it vanished. Rita's tone hardened. Vanished. Or maybe he invested it wisely and you two are jumping to conclusions because you're upset. Dad taught me to trust family. He wouldn't lie to us. I tried to keep calm. Honey, the notebook shows losses, big ones, and accounts in my name I didn't open. She laughed, a short, bitter sound. Notebook, Mom, come on. Dad was the most honest man I know. If there are problems, it's probably a mix-up at the bank. You're destroying his memory over paperwork. Jerry opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. Rita, I wish it was a mix-up. But the signatures aren't mine. The dates line up with times he said he was working late. Her voice cracked. Stop it. You're turning him into some villain just days after we buried him. I won't listen to this. Dad loved us. He loved you. If you're going to trash his name, don't expect me to help. The line went dead. Jerry rubbed his temples. She'll come around. She's hurting. I wasn't so sure. Rita had always been Dennis's shadow, his golf buddy, his cheerleader at company picnics, the one who quoted his advice like gospel. Hearing the truth felt like yanking away her anchor. The doorbell rang. Barbara, my older sister, stood there with a bottle of red wine and a determined look. She'd driven over from her place across town as soon as I texted her a quick summary. We moved to the living room and I handed her the folder Jerry had compiled. Barbara scanned the pages, lips pursed. This isn't just bad investments, this is fraud. Separate accounts, forged signatures on cards. That's identity theft, John. Even if he's gone, the creditors won't care. They'll come after you. I nodded, throat tight. What do I do? She set the folder down. You fight. Get a lawyer who specializes in this. Prove the forgeries. File disputes with the credit bureaus. It won't be easy. Courts take months and you'll need evidence like handwriting samples. But you can void a lot of this debt if you show you weren't involved. Jerry looked up. Mom's name is on some of it. They might argue spousal liability. Barbara waved that off. Not if it's fraud. Kentucky law protects against that kind of deception. But you have to act fast before interest piles up more. I poured the wine with shaking hands. Dennis always said family first. Funny how he put everything last. Barbara squeezed my arm. He made choices. Now you make yours. Don't let grief stop you from protecting what's left. We talked until midnight. Strategies, phone numbers for lawyers, tips on freezing credit. Jerry stayed quiet, mostly processing. Barbara left with a hug and a promise to go with me to the first appointment. After they were gone, I stood in the doorway staring at the empty street. Rita's words echoed. "You're destroying his memory." Maybe I was, but letting the lies stand would destroy mine. A few weeks later, I met Karen Mitchell in her office downtown Louisville, a bright corner suite overlooking the Ohio River. Karen was in her late 40s, sharp suit, sharper eyes, the kind of lawyer who didn't waste words. Barbara had recommended her after calling 3 firms. She's handled spousal financial messes before, and she doesn't sugarcoat. I walked in with a box of documents, copies of the ledger pages, statements Jerry had printed, the credit card applications. Karen listened without interrupting as I laid it all out. The separate accounts, the forged signatures, the way Dennis had kept everything hidden for years. When I finished, she leaned back. "This is textbook spousal financial deception, John. Not mismanagement, fraud, identity theft using your name. The good news, we can challenge most of it. The bad news, creditors will fight tooth and nail." She started with the credit cards. "We file disputes immediately. Get a handwriting expert to compare your real signature against the applications. If they match the forgery pattern, and they will, the bureaus have to remove them from your report." We moved fast. Within 10 days, the expert, a retired FBI analyst Karen used regularly, examined samples from my old checks, driver's license renewals, even a birthday card Dennis had me sign years ago. His report came back unequivocal. The signatures on 15 credit card applications were not mine. "High-confidence forgery," he wrote. "Consistent stroke pressure anomalies and letter formations inconsistent with the exemplar." Karen filed the disputes that same week. 2 of the card companies folded quickly, removed the balances entirely, $90,000 wiped from my credit file. The third dragged it out, demanding proof I hadn't benefited from the charges. Karen sent them the expert report and Dennis's own ledger notes. They backed down 2 weeks later. For the first time since finding that notebook, I felt like I could breathe. The cards were gone. But the home loans were different beasts. The bank, the same one Dennis had used for decades, sent a letter refusing to void the $250,000 in equity lines. Their argument, as spouse Mrs. Hill benefited from the marital home and improvements funded by the loans. They attached photos of our renovated kitchen, the deck Dennis built in 2018, even the new roof from 2021. "Community property principles apply," their lawyer wrote. "She enjoyed the benefits during the marriage." Karen called me the day the letter arrived. "They're playing the spousal benefit card hard. It's a common defense in these cases. They'll argue you lived in the house, so you implicitly consented." I drove downtown again, hands tight on the wheel. "I never saw a dime of that money. It went straight to his failed investments." Karen nodded. "We know, but they don't care about intent. They care about liability. We need to prove the loans were fraudulent from the start. No disclosure, no consent, forged elements if any docs were in your name." She filed a formal complaint with the state banking regulator and prepared for mediation. The bank's attorney, a slick young guy in his 30s, showed up to the first meeting in a conference room that smelled like fresh coffee and old money. He smiled like we were discussing a minor policy change. "Mrs. Hill," he said, "your husband managed the household finances with your knowledge for 30 years. You signed joint tax returns. You lived comfortably. The law recognizes that benefit." Karen cut in. "Knowledge consent. She has zero evidence of either. The expert already confirmed forgery on related docs. This is fraud, not marital agreement." He leaned forward. "Benefit doesn't require signature. It requires marriage. She enjoyed the home. The loans preserved it." I spoke up for the first time. "Preserved. Dennis used the money to chase get-rich-quick schemes while I planned retirement trips we'd never take. I didn't enjoy anything. I was kept in the dark." The attorney shrugged. "Courts look at the big picture. Spousal benefit is real." Karen slid the expert report across the table. "The big picture includes fraud. We'll see what a judge says." The mediation ended without agreement. Karen warned me, "This is heading to court. It'll cost more. Depositions, filings, maybe expert testimony again. But we have strong evidence. The forgeries are clear. The notebook is damning. I left the building feeling like I'd been in a boxing ring. The win on the credit cards felt small now against the looming threat of the house. Foreclosure notices had started arriving. Late payments triggered by Dennis's accounts being frozen after his death. The bank wanted their money, and they weren't shy about using every legal lever. Back home, I sat with Barbara over tea. They say I benefited because I lived here, like the roof over my head was payment for 30 years of lies. Barbara snorted. That's like saying a wife benefits from her husband's gambling because she gets to live in the casino penthouse. Ridiculous. Fight it. You've got the truth on your side. Jerry called later that night. Mom, Rita's still not talking to me. She thinks we're attacking Dad's legacy. I sighed. Tell her the legacy is the mess he left, not the man she remembers. The legal battle had just begun, and every step forward felt like wading through mud. But for the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I was pushing back. Hard. Months dragged on with court prep, and every day felt like a new punch to the gut. Karen turned our dining room into a war room. Stacks of depositions, color-coded timelines, thick binders labeled fraud evidence. We met twice a week, going over every detail until I could recite the loan dates in my sleep. Jerry came when he could, bringing takeout and quiet support, but Rita stayed radio silent. Not one text, not one call. I'd sent her the court date 3 times. Nothing. The hearing finally arrived on a chilly November morning at Jefferson County Courthouse. I dressed like armor, navy suit, low heels, hair pulled back tight. Barbara drove me downtown, squeezing my hand in the parking lot. "You've got this," she said. "Truth wins eventually." I wanted to believe her. Inside the courtroom, the bank's team looked like they'd stepped out of a catalog. 3 lawyers, glossy briefcases, confident smiles. Their lead counsel, the same young guy from mediation, stood first. He painted a picture of a loving marriage, shared assets, a wife who benefited from home improvements and lifestyle funded by the loans. He showed blown-up photos, our remodeled bathroom, the sunroom. Dennis added even vacation snapshots from 10 years ago. "Mrs. Hill lived the good life," he said smoothly. "She can't claim ignorance now." My stomach knotted. Karen stayed cool, waiting her turn. When she stood, the room shifted. She started slow. Timeline of the loans, Dennis's separate accounts, the handwriting expert's sworn affidavit. Then she brought out the big gun, enlarged copies of Dennis's ledger notes projected on the screen for the judge to see. Tried to cover losses. One read. Jean must not find out. Another. Used equity line to buy time. Bad bet again. The bank's lawyer objected. "Hearsay, Your Honor, the author is deceased." Karen countered fast. "Admission against interest. Exception applies." The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, overruled. "I'll allow it." Karen called me to the stand. My legs shook walking up, but once I started talking, the words poured out. "I never discussed these loans, never saw the money, never signed anything. Dennis told me our retirement was secure while he gambled it away." Cross-examination was brutal. "Mrs. Hill, you filed joint taxes for 30 years. You never noticed discrepancies." "I trusted my husband," I answered. "He was the numbers guy. I taught Sunday school and kept the garden." "You enjoyed the home renovations." "I enjoyed the home we paid for together 40 years ago, not the ones built on lies." The lawyer smirked. "Convenient memory now that payments are due." Karen objected. Badgering. Sustained. Closing arguments dragged another hour. The bank pushed marital community benefit. Karen hammered fraud, forgery, lack of consent. We left the courthouse drained, no decision yet. "Judges take time," Karen said. "Could be weeks." It was 4 long weeks of jumping at every phone ring, checking mail like it might explode. Foreclosure warnings piled up, red stamps, final notices. I stopped opening them. Then the ruling came. Karen called while I was grocery shopping. We won, Jean. Judge ruled clear fraud. Loans voided, liens released, house is safe. I stood frozen in the cereal aisle, tears hitting my mask. Safe. After everything. But the victory tasted bitter. Legal fees had drained what little cash remained. $25,000 gone. Credit score tanked to the low 500s. Rebuilding would take years. The bank appealed immediately, tying things up longer. And Rita, she'd ignored the hearing completely. Jerry told me later she'd posted old photos of Dennis on social media that day. Missing my hero. Barbara threw a small celebration, champagne on my porch. You beat them, she toasted. Jerry hugged me hard. Dad would be, well, he made his bed. I smiled weakly. We saved the house but lost everything else. The kids' trust. The illusion of a perfect marriage. Rita's voice in my life. Some wins cost more than losses. That night alone again, I walked through empty rooms that suddenly felt too big. The judge gave me the deed back. But the home Dennis and I built, that was gone forever. A year after the funeral, the for sale sign finally came down in front of our old house. Selling wasn't a choice. It was survival. The legal win voided the loans, but the interest that had accrued during the fight, plus the fees, left a hole too big to fill with what remained. Real estate agent said the market was kind. We got enough to pay off the remaining balance and walk away with a small check. I signed the papers in the kitchen one last time, looking at the wallpaper I'd chosen 30 years ago. Dennis had hated the pattern, said it was too busy. Funny how the house outlasted him. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the east side of Louisville, ground floor, no stairs, rent that wouldn't bankrupt me. The place was clean, quiet, and smelled faintly of fresh paint. No garden, no deck, no memories in every corner. Just walls and a small balcony overlooking a parking lot. I unpacked boxes, slowly putting Dennis's old golf clubs in the storage unit I rented across town. They belonged to another life. Work came next. I started part-time at the local grocery store down the street, stocking shelves 3 mornings a week, bagging groceries the rest. The manager, a kind woman named Ellen who'd been there 25 years, hired me after one interview. You look like someone who shows up, she said. I did. The routine helped. Early shifts, friendly customers, the simple satisfaction of a clean aisle. Pay wasn't much, but it covered rent and groceries. For the first time in decades, money was mine alone. Jerry helped when he could. He'd drop off checks for utilities or send gift cards for the store. Mom let me do more, he'd say. I thanked him, but kept it limited. He'd already lost enough. His dad, his sister, part of his faith in family. I didn't want him carrying my burden too. Rita never came back. Not once. Jerry tried reaching her. Texts, calls, even showing up at her door. She blocked him after the 3rd attempt. Last I heard from a mutual neighbor, she moved to Nashville for a job promotion. No goodbye, no explanation. Just gone. I kept her old bedroom door closed in my mind. Opening it hurt too much. Dennis's scandal hit the local news quietly at first. A short article in the business section about former insurance agent under investigation for unauthorized investments. Then it spread. Clients he'd misled filed complaints with the state insurance board. His license was revoked posthumously, a rare move, but the evidence from the ledger was damning. Old colleagues distanced themselves. Some quietly settled with affected families. The man who'd been pillar of the community became a cautionary tale whispered at golf courses and church coffee hours. I didn't gloat. I just felt empty. The anger had burned out, leaving ash. Nights were the hardest. I'd sit on the balcony with a cup of decaf watching cars come and go, thinking about what I'd lost. Not just the house or the money, the illusion that love meant blind trust. I'd spent 30 years believing Dennis had my back. Turns out he had his own agenda and I was collateral damage. Jerry visited once a month. We'd talk about his kids, the weather, anything but the past. Barbara called weekly, checking in like a big sister should. But Rita's silence was a permanent scar. Some bridges don't get rebuilt. They just stay burned. One evening, sorting mail, I found a final statement from the credit bureau. Score creeping up slowly, still far from good. I laughed. A dry, humorless sound. 30 years to build a life, I muttered to the empty room. 6 months to lose it and the rest of my life to clean up the mess. What a bargain. I closed the drawer and went to bed early. Tomorrow was another shift at the store. Another day of showing up. Another day proving that even when everything falls apart, you can still stand. The lesson was simple and cold. Trust, but verify. Love doesn't mean handing over your future without looking. And when the person you trusted most turns out to be the one who hurt you deepest, sometimes the only way forward is alone. Looking back from my small apartment, I never thought I'd end up here. Alone in a rented one-bedroom, paying bills with my own paycheck, no one to share the quiet evenings with. But here I am, and strangely enough, it's not the end I feared. It's a beginning I never asked for, but learned to accept. The value of this whole nightmare isn't in the money lost or the house sold. It's in the hard truth it forced me to face. For 30 years, I let someone else hold the reins of our life because he knows best. I was the good wife who trusted, who didn't question, who believed love meant handing over control. That belief nearly destroyed me. The real lesson, the one I wish every woman over 50 listening right now would tattoo on her heart, is simple and brutal. Even the model husband can ruin you. The one who seems perfect, who handles everything, who says, "I've got it covered," with a smile. He can still be hiding a disaster behind that smile. Don't wait for the storm to hit. Check your finances yourself. Open the statements. Ask the questions. Verify the numbers. Love is partnership, not blind faith. And if something feels off, even a tiny whisper, trust your gut more than 30 years of habit. I don't forgive Dennis. I don't hate him either. What he did was wrong. Legally, morally, deeply wrong. And the consequences are his to carry even from the grave. But I've stopped letting that define my days. I wake up, go to work, come home, and live on my own terms. It's not glamorous. It's not the retirement I planned. But it's honest. And honesty, after all the lies, feels like the greatest luxury. To everyone who's listened to my story all the way through, thank you. Truly. Sharing this wasn't easy, but if it helps even one person avoid the same trap, it was worth every painful word. Thank you for your time, for your attention, for sitting with me through the anger, the heartbreak, and the quiet aftermath. I wish you all good health, real happiness, and the kind of security that comes from knowing your own affairs inside out. May your marriages be built on truth, your finances on transparency, and your later years on peace you've earned yourself. If this story resonated with you, like the video if it moved, you subscribe to the channel if you want more real stories like this, and drop a comment below. Tell me what you think, what you'd do differently, or share your own quiet warning signs. Your words help me, and help me write better stories for all of us. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share the video. Spread the word. Because the more we talk about these things, the less power they have to surprise us. Take care of yourselves out there. You've got this, even when it feels like you don't.